So I'm now delighted to introduce our next and final speaker of this session, Kenna Shawh. She's Executive Director of the Institute for Personalised Cancer Therapy, the Anderson Cancer Centre. But actually what I'm particularly pleased to introduce you because you have a lot of experience of education and involvement with the public and public understanding of genomics. So it's very good to hear from you.
Thank you. So actually my talk is quite interesting, bookmark or bookend to the one we just heard. In fact, I'm going to go in the opposite direction, at least in the context of cancer. In my talk today, I'm going to talk to you about getting to the right patient with the right drug, and very importantly, at the right time. And so I don't think anybody in this room hasn't seen an image like this, or this one in particular, where we take population-based standard of care answers that are decided based on how a bell curve responds to a specific drug for a specific disease, and then trying to use genomics or some other marker to try to determine whether it's your warfarin dose or whether it's what targeted chemotherapeutic we're going to provide you. We start to try to provide genotype and phenotype-based treatments instead, or personalize or be more precise in our care. But the reality is, especially in cancer therapy at least, the trajectory of care looks very much the same today as it did even 20 or 25 years ago. This is an image on the treatment landscape in prostate cancer, and basically most of our prostate cancer patients all go through across the world, essentially get the same treatments. They start with local therapy, then they get androgen deprivation, then they might get denosumab, zoledronic acid, etc. But eventually, no matter what we do, no matter whether they have a short-term response or a long-term response, unfortunately, all of these patients have the same outcome, and that outcome is death. And whether that outcome comes very close to original diagnosis or very far into their treatment paradigm, ultimately, we're still seeing a lot of patients die from metastatic disease. And as a personalized cancer treatment center, at least at the MD Anderson Cancer Center, so this is quite interesting. At least thank you for everybody talking about Houston and the other moonshot talks. We are trying to, of course, change this, but one of the real problems is we're not trying to change the paradigm until they're very close to this endpoint, meaning by the time they come to MD Anderson Cancer Center and we are providing them with a targeted therapeutic, if we can find a target for them, they've already progressed through many of these other lines of therapies. Thus, my question is, are we even doing this at the right time? And so we'll talk about that later. So I think, again, also with the different technologies that are out there, whether you're talking about the sequencing of the human genome or not, I think everyone is doing multiplex testing. And that's simply because if we're only looking at one rare gene mutation at a time, like AKT1, we would have to search many thousands of patients in order to find enough for a small clinical phase 1 trial. In the case of AKT, for example, we have 29 patients in our first cohort of about 2,500 patients. This would have, if we just sequenced, if we just sequenced across the board one gene, it would cost us about $2 million to screen enough patients in order to be able to populate this clinical trial. But of course, through studies like the Cancer Genome Atlas, or TCGA, and the International Cancer Genomics Consortium, we pretty much have a fairly good idea of the landscape of human mutations in cancer genes. We know what those look like, and I would argue that we know which ones are actionable and which ones aren't. And so, in terms of how we do cancer genomics sequencing panels, we started from in 2010, and I don't have a laser pointer, and I thought I was going to be on a lavalier mic, so I'm trying to shift around here. But within each gene, we know that there's many different types of mutations. Back in 2010, we started with really single gene testing, looking at maybe just KRAS, maybe just BRAF. 2011, we were doing maybe a dozen genes at a time. 2012, 2013, moving at least at our institute to 46 to 50 genes at a time. More recently, our institute in particular has moved to a 400 gene test. We're now scaling that back. Because in general, at least with the cancer genome, exomes aren't very helpful. And the reason why exomes are generally not very helpful in the oncology space is we have, right now, that are clinically actionable, about 150 genes. There are 150 approximately, depending on who you ask and which clinical trial they're running at that time or which drug they might have in development. There are about 150 genes that I know if you have a mutation, I might possibly be able to act on it with a molecularly targeted drug. So really going bigger in the cancer genomic space does not help me much in order to tailor a treatment for you. Of course, I'm not a clinician, so I don't tailor treatments for anyone, but in terms of trying to inform our clinicians what they should do. So when we do these multiplex screening technologies, the nice thing is that I don't care kind of which mutation out of all my actionable genes you have. If you have an arrow and you have a mutation, I can find a trial for you because I have basket trials that are independent of my tumor type. Whether you have an EGFR mutation, I have a neratinib trial for you, and dabrafenib and trametinib combination therapies if you have a BRAF mutation. So I don't care what tumor type you have. I have a drug if it's on one of those actionable genes. I generally have a clinical trial available at our institution. And right now, across the world, again, we have thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of patients that have been tested across one of these types of panels, whether it's a small panel or a large panel. Some people are doing exomes. How many of those patients are getting put on the right drug? My answer is not very many. Whether you look at the Cornell paper, which is publishing on the exact one assay, which is a whole exome assay, our own studies testing, in our case, the study we just published and the one I'll go over today is about a 50 gene, 46 to 50 gene panel. We are only putting 1 out of 10 patients that have a mutation in an actionable gene on a clinical trial. So in these cases in general, I'm not talking about the patients that have a standard of care option. So if you're a melanoma patient and you haven't gone on immunotherapy, or you've already done immunotherapy and you have a BRAF mutation, there's a standard of care agent for you, vemurafenib. So not including any of the standard of care patients. So in this case, I'm talking about trying to be precise with our therapies after you failed standard of care. How are we doing? And again, only 1 out of 10, and that's in a good case, are we putting our patients on a matched therapy. So are we just really bad at this? Are we lazy? Are we not doing the testing? Are we not interpreting it? Why are we doing so bad at this? I'm going to go over why, at least at MD Anderson, we're so bad, because our number is not better. We have the #1 cancer center in the United States of America, and our number is at 10-11%. I'm only putting 10 or 11% of our patients on a clinical trial that matches to their mutation. I know they have a mutation, and only 1 out of 10 of them are getting put on an agent. Why? So what is right? So in my context today, right means you have a mutation in a specific gene. Right means I'm putting you on a drug that is mapped to that gene or pathway. Okay, so very generic, that's what right means. For us, we're sequencing 50 genes, so we're looking at a very small panel, and I'm considering 33 out of 50 of those potentially actionable. That means that on a whole gene level, I know that there's either a clinical trial or a drug or something for that gene or that pathway that I could place a patient on, theoretically, in our institution, okay? The other 17 of them, I don't have anything for. I do not consider TP53 actionable, so if you do, that's off this list. KRAS is actionable because I can put you on a MET-targeted therapy, and of course, if you have a KRAS mutation in colorectal cancer, with EGFR, you wouldn't go on a therapy. So that's, I just want to put that out there because depending on which genes you consider actionable, your numbers completely change. So TP53 is not and KRAS is. Now what I'm looking at again is not standard of care options. This patient population that I'm going to go after have already gone on standard of care therapies. These are your BRAF patients or your EGFR and colorectal cancer patients or your outpatients in lung. These are not the population we're looking at. We are looking at patients who have progressed their standard of care options, matched or unmatched, and no longer have a standard of care option. They are molecularly tested in order to put them on a clinical trial or in order to find them a matched agent, presumably. So I have genotype selected trials, meaning that the trial eligibility criteria say you must have a mutation in XYZ gene in order to go on my clinical trial because I'm looking to enrich my population. We have genotype relevant trials, for example, that might use a drug like trametinib but don't require you to have a BRAF or a MEK alteration. And so those are genotype selected or genotype relevant. In either case, if you're put on either type of trial, I consider it a match. I consider it you got put on the right drug for this population. So we test 2,000 patients. We look at 50 genes, 33 again of which I would consider actionable for this analysis, and about 4 out of 10 of them, or 40% of them, have a mutation in an actionable gene. So 40% of the patients have a mutation in one of those 33 genes. The rest of them do not. We can go over the data in terms of what we do with germline, route variants, etc. But in this case, I'm only worried about my 40% of patients. The other 60%, this testing did absolutely nothing for. I could sequence all of their genes. In fact, we've gone through and done extra sequencing on these folks, and in general, more sequencing doesn't matter. 40% approximately of the genome in these patients, I have a hit. The rest of the testing was irrelevant for these patients. So now I only have a population, out of my 2,000 patients, I only have a population of 800, approximately. 789 is my specific number. So 789, I no longer have a number of 2,000. I only have 789 patients to work with in terms of being able to have the opportunity of getting them on a matched therapy. And that number is true across the board. That's not a US number. That number is true in almost every study I've looked at. About 40% of our patients have a mutation in an actionable gene. They all have a mutation in something, just most of them aren't actionable. And so then my question was, what happened to those patients? And like I said, our number was 11%. So for us, 83 of those 789 patients went on a matched therapy. What happened to 700 of our patients? I tested them. I know they have a mutation in a potentially actionable gene, and we did nothing. We did something, we just didn't put them on the right drug. Why? It wasn't because MD Anderson Cancer Center did not have a trial for them. Here are my 33 genes. I got circles because I had a drug for them on my campus during the time where I had an answer in their medical record that said, I have a potential trial or drug for you. It wasn't because we don't have options. So I just want to make it clear, we had a treatment possibility. Today at MD Anderson, we actually do not have a PI3 kinase relevant trial. PI3 kinase is the #1 most actionable gene in our genomes, according to mutations in that gene in cancer. And I don't have a trial for them. So today, not such a good day for you if you have a PI3 kinase mutation, but during the course of this study, we did. And so just to give you an idea, here's kind of the spectrum of actionable alterations. Even though I got 33 of them, most of them really don't even fall outside of this half of the actionable alterations. And I just started to focus in on the most actionable pathway, which is our PI3 kinase BRAF pathway, okay? So just in that pathway alone, we have 429 patients. So my number at the very top is my new N, okay? So I'm now just looking at the most actionable pathway because I definitely had an option for all of those patients, meaning regardless of what tumor type, I had a therapeutic trial for them. I had an umbrella trial and a basket trial that could have taken somebody in if you had a mutation in this pathway, PI3 kinase, AKT, BRAF, etc. 429 is my new N. So, how many of those patients came back to MD Anderson? How many of those patients out of 429 did I even have a chance to see again? 354. So I know my new N is 354 simply because I never contacted 75 of our patients to tell them they had a potentially actionable mutation. Now, I didn't have to contact anyone, but my clinicians who had the test result in the medical record of their patient never contacted the patients to tell them they had a potentially actionable mutation. Can you imagine if you were a patient, you got called by your doctor to say, I might have an option for you? You think you would have come back to MD Anderson? Probably, but it's not happening. Out of the patients, this is my favorite, out of the patients that came back to MD Anderson, so they're sitting in my office or my clinician's office, the clinicians we work with, they're sitting in front of me, 69, so 70% had the results mentioned in the medical record. 3 out of 10 patients that sat in our doctor's office after we spent thousands of dollars getting molecular tests, after our insurers reimbursed thousands of dollars because this patient had a molecular test, they have an actionable alteration that I can put them on a trial for. 3 out of 10 of those patients never knew it, even after they sat in our office, and the doctors never acknowledged the test results in the medical record. Meaning, I have no idea if those clinicians looked at it, ignored it, didn't care about it, didn't like it, didn't believe it, no idea. Never acknowledged the test was ever done for their patients. Why was it ordered if you're not going to look at the data and use it? 67% of those patients did discuss a trial, or those doctors did discuss a trial with their patients. So, or at least in the medical record, it was discussed that they considered it. So again, so now I've lost 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10 doctors mentioned it in the record, and then they didn't do anything about it. So you acknowledge a test was performed. They might have even acknowledged that there was a mutation in a potentially actionable gene, And then they did nothing with it. No discussion of I looked at the trial, the patient wasn't eligible, nothing. No idea if that information triggered anything but, oh, I paid for the test, so I should probably write it down. No other information. But 7 out of those 10, they discussed it, they discussed a clinical trial, and yet, again, believe it or not, 6 out of those 10 were enrolled ultimately on an enrollment trial, on a clinically matched trial. So I got 7 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10. All of a sudden, these numbers get really, really small, right? And it's because what happens to my 4 out of 10 in this case of folks that the doctor noted it, the patient came back, the doctor noted it in the medical record, they talked about clinical trial enrollment with their patients, and 4 out of 10 of those patients never got enrolled. Why? They went for treatment elsewhere. Honestly, some of these phase 1 trials are pretty intense. You are required to come back once every week, once every 3 weeks for treatment. And when they start deciding on quality of life issues, it's not simply worth it. MD Anderson is a tertiary cancer center. We're probably always going to lose that category of patients, right? That, it's just not simply worth it for them to come back every 3 weeks. They can't afford the travel, and the trials are only available in 1, 2, 3 centers across the country. They decided to go non-investigational. They simply don't want to be on a phase 1 trial of any kind, or a phase 2 trial. 11 of our patients, right, so 11 out of those 40, 10% of our patients that didn't go on trial weren't eligible. Again, generally this is because they have active brain mets. So by the time they get considered they have active brain mets or leptomeningeal disease, something that keeps them from moving on, they have a bad creatinine, they have liver cancer, something is going wrong. We had a small number of patients who get insurance denials. Lots of our patients, unfortunately, by the time they get the results of this test, come back to see their doctor and have progressed. Their survival is unfortunately no longer, or they have a too poor prognosis or performance status. So my group, what we started to work on are the no's. If we're going to change the face of personalized cancer therapy treatments or precision medicine at MD Anderson Cancer Center, we have to figure out why patients are coming back, why they never knew they had a potentially actionable mutation, why their physicians didn't know that they had a potentially actionable alteration, or that there was a clinical trial for that potentially actionable alteration. So we started a decision support team, which it was very interesting, actually starts to give many different answers in terms of what a variant means for these patients. So we went through and we started to go through every single variant that one of our patients has had. So we had 13,000 patients overall, so this is going back to our general population, and 6,000 different variants. So there's no way any single clinician can manage this amount of information, and so we started to do that for them. And just to point out a piece of data, this is from the MSK group with just one single gene kit. When you start to look at things, they're only seeing functional mutations in a very small number of alterations that they see in kits. So it's not all mutations are created equally. So just because you have a mutation in an actionable gene doesn't necessarily mean you should act on it. So if the physicians who have a mutation in a potentially actionable gene weren't acting on it because it's a BRAF mutation that's known to be not functional, that's a great answer. That's not why they're not acting on it. I wish it was, but we're not quite that good, but we're getting there. And so we really started to try to go through every single variant that our patients have in their tumors and start to annotate them. So what we get is on the left, the physicians give back a report with every gene that's been sequenced. If you have a mutation, it's circled. We might tell you what the exact mutation is, but most clinicians have no idea what to do from a report like this. So they can come to us, and we actually annotate every alteration, every drug, every clinical trial. To date, on our website, you can go to personalizedcancertherapy.org and see some of the most functional genes. We're getting ready to publish BRCA1, actually, so it'd be interesting to see how our two lists compare. We've done over 3,200 single patients. We've annotated over 1,500 drugs and 3,200 clinical trials. I want to point out, though, this VUS problem, because that is a significant problem in every single space, and the more we sequence, the more of them we have. Just out of our first 26 genes that we've comprehensively characterized, so we've looked at every mutation in these 26 genes ever found either in TCGA, ICGC, or MD Anderson's patient population, We found over 13,000 mutations in those 26 genes, and we found 1,400 of them to be functionally significant. Meaning 90% of the mutations we find in a cancer genomic sequencing report are uninterpretable to a clinician. They do not know what to do with them. So we start to put them in functional genomics assays. This is just an example of one of these where we put the specific alterations we see. This happens to be for EGFR. Many of these mutations have actually not been published before. This is just to show you that we see some mutations that have activity in a functional genomics assay, some that do not, and often these are not predicted by the informatics algorithm. So if you're looking at polyphen or SIFT, etc., they're not able to very well predict what's actually functional in a functional genomics assay. So we also provide the results of these assays on our VUSs, our variants of unknown significance, to our clinicians. We put this now all into a report. You can either come to our website and ask for a report, or we send you something in an email. So we send you an email alert. Although physicians hate emails, right now we don't have a highly functional EHR, but apparently on March 4th, Epic is going to solve all of our problems at MD Anderson, and on March 4th we go live with our EHR, so who knows what will happen then. But we send these email alerts and annotation inquiries out, and what I can tell you is this. Our no's start turning to yeses a little bit more when we start doing this. So when we perform decision support in real time, we can just more than double our rate of moving the no's to yeses. So how many patients didn't get enrolled, didn't get communicated, didn't get talked to, we start to get that rate changing. Again, 25% now of our most recent study. So we're looking now at a 400 gene panel, looking at the patients that have a delta between that 50 gene, what we saw before, and now a broader panel, what we see in those patients, because now we have copy number added, etc. We see about 20% or so of our patients with a known activating mutation being enrolled, 7 out of 34, so about 20% again, of our known inactivating patients getting enrolled, and 22 out of 291 patients with a VUS. So we're still enrolling patients that have VUSs, but I would like to just point out that that's 10%, but when we know it's activating, we actually more than double that. So when we know it's activating, we know it's inactivating, we do a much better job of enrolling, again, doubling the previous percentage, and this is just with our first 500 patients. And I will say that we're still waiting for about 10% of the patients on the study to progress on their previous line of therapy, which means I don't know what we're going to do yet for those 12%. We can't change their current therapy. And we're doing all this now with better reports and more detail, and trying to provide level of evidence for every drug that we associate with a specific patient. That all said, we're doing this too late. These patients are coming to MD Anderson, like I said, in terms of this top left slide, in terms of this treatment paradigm, we're treating them at that last arrow. Right before death, these patients have progressed through every other form of standard of care therapy. And we're treating them at the last moment, basically in a Hail Mary approach. And yet we know that responses are going to vary significantly. In fact, it's the #1 phenotype we see in cancer. Every patient has a different tumor type, has a different response to the same drug, even if they have the same molecular therapy. We're not doing a very good job, and that is because, unfortunately, cancer doesn't look like a linear pathway where we have circles and upstream and downstream of other circles. Right? What we have is this interconnected network of information with patients. My last slide. Interconnected network of patient data, molecular data, biological data, phenotype data, and we're not designing our trials or our treatments based on data that we know is true. We know cancer looks like the network at the bottom. We're treating cancer like the linear paradigm at the top left. And as long as we continue to do that, we will fail, in my opinion, we are going to fail in personalized cancer treatment. And that's why we do need more informaticists to be able to design clinical trials with our clinicians that are reflecting that network down at the bottom. And so with that, this is our institute. I'm the executive director, but we're led by medical director Funda Merrick Bernstam, and of course Dr. John Mendelsohn is our director, and chair of systems biology is co-director Gordon Mills. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenna. That's a terrific presentation. And one of the things with Genomics England that we're thinking very, very hard about is what form we're going to put the reports that we send back to clinicians in, because, as you so clearly point out, they are absolutely critical in ensuring action for the patient. One other thing I wondered is, what do we say to actually the very large number of people who come along hoping that there's going to be some silver bullet because we've said all this thing about, personalised therapies, and actually there's bugger all, as we would say here in the UK. There is nothing for them to know. I mean, what are we going to say to those people when we find that there is nothing that we can act on?
Yeah, I mean, even in a space like cancer, where I think most of us think we're farther ahead in terms of personalized therapy than we are in some other disease types. Like I said, 60% of our patients have bugger all in terms of what I could do for them at MD Anderson Cancer Center. I will say that when we test patients at this point, most of our patients that are tested are put on a protocol so that they're aware of these percentages when we talk to them. So when they come to us and they ask, what are the chances that you're going to find something, I say 40% of our patients we have something that we might be able to act on, but the reality is much smaller number, about 10% are mutations that we think even have a known significance that you would want to take the risk. And so I think we set those expectations up front, that the reality is we don't have a high expectation that we're going to find something that's going to directly lead us to change our clinical decision course.
I was wondering, I mean, you are in the most litigation enthusiastic nation in the world. Are there not patients now, I can imagine there are teams of lawyers wanting to sift through people's cancer reports to check for missed actionable diagnosis. So
I think the reality is that we are a litigious nation. We talked about this last night at dinner, and so far that hasn't been a huge problem. In part, and I think we can in part rely on the fact that the clinicians are making what they would consider a best guess judgment, and many of these mutations are not part of standard of care. If a lung cancer patient with a known standard of care mutation was missed, I think we're in a much different ballpark. But because so many of these are really still in the phase of research, these are still clinical trials, I think we're in a different situation.
Let's take one question and then we're going to break. And are you all freezing in here?
Yes.
That is actually, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not from the UK, that's because Excel, although it's claimed to be London, is actually closer to the North Sea than it is to London.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I have a question about the number of patients who were missed. And actually, MD Anderson is a wonderful place. You have a lot of opportunity and the infrastructure. Is there a way of preventing or catching the mistake of missing all those patients before? I mean, it's.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you how we've solved it. So the problem historically has been that the group that quote unquote cares about trying to direct patients to clinical trials, which is still research, has historically been completely separate essentially from the group that's creating the clinical diagnostic report. So that the molecular diagnostics laboratory that runs the sequencing and puts the report in the patient record, and our group that's trying to match patients to trials, believe it or not, have been completely separate groups. So now what's happening is we're getting the data in real time sent to us from the molecular diagnostics, so we don't have to go into a medical record, hand type in the mutations into our system. We now literally get a data flow, and then that data flow can trigger a clinical trial alert that can tell a physician literally the same day that there's a clinical trial available to their patient based on at least the molecular information alone. It doesn't necessarily go into all of the comorbidity information and all the other inclusion criteria, but at least it can tell you, based on the molecular data alone, your patient has a mutation that would qualify them for this trial. And that has helped us a lot with. Now, at least it's almost always in the medical record, written by the physician. So we've seen the number go from a relatively small number of physicians that are noting it in the record to now over 90% of the physicians. It also helps to survey them and to ping them and to continue to ask them what they did with the information. And we found that nagging actually changes behavior also.
I'm going to have to cut you off, I'm afraid. Fantastic. Kenny, you've given us so much to think about. I can see people who are in the genomic medicine centres thinking there's an awful lot to learn from you. Thank you very much. I take it from you also that it's not actually just about educating physicians. We need to help physicians. We really need to support them with some absolutely terrific graphic illustrations of what they need to do, rather than just relying on kind of beating them over the head with a fish and educating them.